Every Saturday morning, I watched him do the same thing: stack paper bags neatly into the trunk of his car, tuck a bottle of red wine into one corner, and double-check the list he always carried in his wallet. "Mom loves the cherry jam," he'd say with a small smile. "Dad's still obsessed with those wheat crackers." Then he'd kiss my forehead, grab his keys, and head out into the cool Portland air, and every time, I'd stand by the kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, feeling this quiet kind of pride. I'd think, God, I married a good man. A man who took care of his parents every single week. A man who remembered the small things, like his mother's favorite tea and his father's bad knee. A man who, at least in my mind, defined what love should look like. That was Jason Miller, my husband for 3 years. The kind of man people envied me for. Neighbors would wave when he carried groceries to the car, smiling like we were living in some perfect suburban dream. My coworkers would sigh when I mentioned how he visited his parents every weekend, saying things like, "You're so lucky, Emily. They don't make men like that anymore." And maybe that's what I believed too. That I'd found someone rare, loyal, thoughtful, dependable. But good men don't keep their families hidden like ghosts. I didn't realize that part until much later. At first, it was just a small question I never asked out loud, because in 3 years of marriage, I had never met his parents, not once. Not on holidays. Not on birthdays. Not even through a video call. Whenever I asked, he'd smile and say, "You'll meet them soon, babe. They're just a little old-fashioned." Other times, he'd joke, "Trust me, you'll thank me later, they're a lot." I used to laugh. I used to think he was protecting me from overbearing in-laws, not realizing he was protecting himself from the truth. The last time I asked, a few weeks ago, something about his face changed. Just a flicker. But I saw I'd been folding laundry, and without thinking, I said, "Jason, maybe next time I can come with you? Help carry things for your mom?" He froze mid-buttoning his shirt. "No need," he said too quickly. "They don't like visitors. And besides, the drive's long." That wasn't strange, not on its own. But the tone, the slight sharpness, it wasn't the Jason I knew. When he left that morning, I stared at his taillights until they disappeared around the corner. For some reason, I couldn't shake the unease in my chest. I tried to rationalize it, told myself maybe I was overthinking again. I'd been tired lately, working long hours as an accountant, maybe just sensitive. After all, Jason had never given me a reason not to trust him. He came home every night. He didn't hide his phone. He remembered anniversaries. But trust isn't about the lies you hear, it's about the truths you never get to see. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain was tapping gently on the window, and the sound reminded me of something my mother used to say when I was little: "When the rain won't stop, it means something wants to be washed away." I stared at the ceiling, wondering what part of my life was about to be cleansed, or ruined. The next Saturday came too soon. Jason was up early, packing the car like always. I stood in the doorway, watching him. "Need help?" I asked softly. He smiled, but his eyes didn't. "No, it's okay. Go back to sleep. I'll be home by 2. By 2. He always said that. He was a man of schedules, of patterns, everything predictable, everything clean. After he drove off, I walked to the kitchen counter and stared at the grocery receipt he'd left behind. 2 cartons of milk, apples, jam, wine. All the same things he bought every week. I didn't know why, but that list suddenly looked rehearsed. Like a script he'd memorized. I laughed it off. But deep down, I felt that strange whisper again, a whisper that sounded a lot like doubt. Later that evening, while washing dishes, I asked myself a question I couldn't answer. If he's been visiting his parents every Saturday for 3 years, why haven't they ever called me? Or invited us for dinner? Or even sent a Christmas card? It should have been an easy thing to dismiss. But instead, the question followed me into bed, into work, into every quiet space between us. The following week, on Friday night, I caught Jason in the living room scrolling through his phone. I leaned against the doorframe and said, almost casually, "Your mom's lucky to have you. You never miss a week." He looked up briefly, smiled faintly. "Yeah. It's the least I can do." "Do they ever ask about me?" I teased. He paused for half a second. "Of course they do," he said, locking his phone. "They love you." I nodded, forcing a smile. But something about his answer didn't fit, not the words, but the space between them. Like a puzzle piece turned upside down. That night, I woke up at 2 a.m. to find him standing by the window, smoking, something he hadn't done in years. When I asked if he was okay, he just said, "Couldn't sleep. Big week ahead." Then he kissed my forehead and went back to bed. I lay awake long after he drifted off, listening to the faint rhythm of his breathing. And for the first time since our wedding day, I realized, I didn't know who this man beside me really was. By morning, the unease had turned into something heavier. Fear, maybe. Or intuition. The kind that tells you something's about to break. Every Saturday, he carried groceries for his parents. Every Saturday, I watched him drive away, but that next Saturday, I decided I wasn't just going to watch anymore. When people looked at us, they saw a perfect marriage. The kind you'd see in a Hallmark card or a real estate brochure, all smiles, good lighting, and fresh paint. Jason and I lived in a small but beautiful house just outside Portland. It had white shutters, a maple tree by the porch, and a garden that somehow always bloomed, even when I forgot to water it. On Sunday mornings, we'd drink coffee together by the window, reading in comfortable silence. Sometimes he'd brush a strand of hair from my face, and I'd think, this is it. This is what peace looks like. I was 35, an accountant by trade, a creature of order and predictability. Jason was 38, confident, easygoing, with the kind of smile that made people trust him instantly. He worked in marketing, which always made sense to me. He knew how to sell anything, especially himself. We met 5 years ago at a client's networking event. I remember spilling coffee on his shirt and apologizing a dozen times while he laughed it off, saying, "Guess you just branded me." He was charming, attentive, the kind of man who noticed small things, how I liked my tea, that I hated noisy bars, that I wore the same perfume every day. Within 8 months, we were married. Our wedding was simple, a small ceremony near the river, friends and colleagues, nothing extravagant. Jason said he preferred intimacy over spectacle. At the time, I thought that made him deep. Now I realize it made him careful. He liked things he could control, and people he could impress, but not too closely. Still, I loved him. Or at least, I loved the version of him I thought I knew. The first year of marriage was everything I'd dreamed of. He'd leave me sticky notes on the fridge, "You're the calm to my chaos. Dinner on me tonight. Don't forget, you're amazing." He called me M. No one else ever did. And for some reason, hearing it from him felt like home. He'd come home late sometimes, smelling faintly of cologne and city air, saying, "Sorry, traffic was a nightmare." I never questioned it. Because that's what good wives do, right? They trust. They believe. They don't go digging into shadows that haven't yet touched them. On paper, everything looked perfect: a stable income, a cozy home, 2 people who respected each other. Even our arguments, rare as they were, ended with him pulling me into his arms, whispering, "Let's not waste time fighting, Em. Life's too short." People adored him. My friends called him the dream husband. My boss once said, "Emily, he's the kind of man every woman hopes to find before she gives up." And I would smile, nod, and agree, because I wanted to believe it too. But perfection is exhausting when it's only skin deep. It takes energy to keep smiling when something inside you feels slightly off balance, like a painting tilted just enough to bother you, but not enough to fix. Jason was affectionate but guarded. Generous but secretive. He'd tell me stories about his job, his coworkers, even the neighbor's dog, but not his parents. In 3 years, I'd never seen a single photo of them. No framed picture, no family portrait, no video call on holidays. Whenever I asked, he'd say, "They're private people. Eminence. They like their peace." I told myself that made sense. Maybe they were just old-fashioned. But sometimes, at night, I'd wake up to find him scrolling through his phone, staring at something I couldn't see, the faint glow of the screen painting his face in blue. When I asked what he was looking at, he'd always say, "Work stuff." And I'd believe him, because that's what love does. It fills in the blanks you're too afraid to question. We didn't have children, not yet. He said we should wait until things were more stable. Stable, that word became his shield for everything. When he didn't want to talk about something, he'd say, "Let's just keep things stable." When I mentioned visiting his parents, "It'll happen when things are stable." When I asked about the promotion he'd been promised, "They're still stabilizing the department." Stable became the language of delay. And I, being the ever-patient wife, kept waiting. Sometimes, though, he'd disappear into the garage late at night. I'd hear the faint hum of his car engine and the sound of his voice, low, muffled, talking to someone. When I asked about it the next morning, he'd smile and say, "Just checking the oil." Jason never raised his voice, never hit me, never gave me an obvious reason to suspect him. But there was a coldness that had crept in slowly, like fog seeping through the cracks. It wasn't what he said, it was what he didn't. He never told me, "I love you," unless I said it first. He never reached for my hand unless someone else was watching. He never let me in, not really. Looking back, maybe that's why I didn't notice how little I actually knew about the man I shared a bed with. Every Saturday morning, he'd load the trunk with groceries, smile, and drive off. He'd return around 2 in the afternoon, humming, smelling faintly of laundry detergent and something floral, maybe his mother's house. I thought that he'd hand me a jar of jam, say, "Mom made this for you," and I'd smile, feeling loved by a woman I'd never met. Once, I asked if I could write her a thank you card. He said, "You don't need to. She knows." It didn't sound strange then. But now, thinking back, I realize, everything about him was built on half-truths. Our marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a performance. And I was the only one who didn't know I was in a play. Still, if anyone had asked me back then, I would have said I was happy. Because happiness, I've learned, isn't always about truth. Sometimes, it's just about not knowing yet. It started with a phone call, the kind that sounds harmless until it isn't. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was at work, half listening to my colleague talk about taxes when my phone buzzed. The caller ID read Mrs. Langford. She was a client, and also, coincidentally, Jason's mother's old neighbor, Emily, dear. Her cheerful southern accent rang through the line. You tell your husband I saw his parents at the airport last weekend. Can you believe it? Florida in March, smart move. They said they'd be there for 2 weeks. I froze. Sorry, I said slowly, what did you just say? Oh, yes. They were so excited. Said they hadn't been down to Naples since before the pandemic. Such sweet people. Sweet people. Two words that sliced through me like a quiet knife. I murmured something polite. Ended the call, and just sat there, staring at the spreadsheet on my screen. Numbers dissolving into nothing. 2 weeks in Florida. But Jason had just told me this morning that he'd drop off groceries for his parents this Saturday, like always. The air felt heavier suddenly. As if the office itself could sense the lie tightening around my throat. When I got home that night, Jason was already there, humming in the kitchen. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air. He smiled when he saw me. Hey, Em. You look tired, he said, kissing my forehead. Long day? I nodded. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely swallow. He carved the chicken, poured wine into 2 glasses, and told me about his day, about a client pitch, a coworker's birthday, traffic on I-84. Everything sounded perfectly normal. I tried to listen. I really did. But my mind was stuck on that one detail, Florida. When he mentioned casually, oh, I'll head to my parents' place Saturday morning, they asked for some fresh fruit and soup. Something inside me cracked. I looked up from my plate, forcing a small smile. Maybe I'll come with you this time, I said. He froze for a fraction of a second, just enough for me to see it. Then the mask slipped back on. Oh, that's sweet, but they're not feeling well. You know how my mom gets when she's sick, she hates guests. He said it with that same easy tone, that practiced warmth that made you doubt your own instincts. I nodded slowly, pretending to buy it. Inside, though, a voice whispered, he's lying. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the faint rhythm of his breathing beside me, wondering how many of our nights had been built on lies. The next day, I did something I'd never done before, something that felt both thrilling and terrifying. I made a plan to follow my husband. Saturday morning came with soft rain and gray skies. Jason was in his usual mood, calm, cheerful, meticulous. He packed 2 paper bags full of groceries, apples, soup, milk, and a jar of honey. He kissed my cheek before leaving. Don't wait up, he said, as always. Traffic's bad this time of year. I waited until I heard the garage door close before grabbing my coat and keys. My heart thudded in my chest as I slipped into my car, parking a few blocks away from our house. Jason's black SUV rolled past, windshield wipers slicing through the drizzle. I started the engine and followed, far enough to stay unnoticed, close enough to never lose him. At first, everything seemed normal. He took the usual route toward the highway, the one that led out of town. But instead of turning south, toward his parents' supposed neighborhood, he veered east. I frowned. East led to the industrial district, warehouses, old apartments, and a part of the city he'd never once mentioned. Maybe he's running an errand first, I told myself. But my grip on the steering wheel tightened. He drove for about 40 minutes before turning into a narrow street lined with small, worn-down apartment buildings. The kind of place where the curtains were always drawn and the air smelled faintly of rain and metal. Jason parked near a faded brick building. He stepped out, carrying one of the grocery bags. I turned off my car and waited, my pulse in my ears. He walked up a narrow staircase and stopped in front of a door marked 3B. For a moment, he just stood there. Then he knocked, the door opened, and what I saw next shattered the world I thought I knew. A woman stood there. Young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair tied loosely, wearing a faded t-shirt. She smiled when she saw him, a smile that belonged to someone who knew him. Then she reached out and hugged him, not politely, not awkwardly. The kind of hug that came from familiarity, from love. He wrapped his arm around her waist. And then, from inside the apartment, a small voice echoed, Daddy. A little girl, maybe 5 or 6, ran out barefoot, clutching a stuffed rabbit. She threw herself into Jason's arms. He lifted her easily, kissing her cheek. Hey, pumpkin, he said softly. The same warmth I'd once thought was mine alone. The world went silent, the rain, the cars, the city, all faded until there was only that sound, Daddy. I sat frozen in my car, the steering wheel digging into my palms. My breath came shallow, uneven. Every heartbeat felt like a punch. Jason carried the little girl inside. The door closed. I didn't move for a long time. I couldn't. It wasn't anger that came first, it was disbelief. Because for 3 years, I'd built my life around a man who had another life entirely, another home, another family, another version of himself. When I finally started the car again, my reflection in the rearview mirror didn't look like me anymore. I drove home slowly, numb, every mile stretching like a lifetime. By the time I parked in our driveway, my hands had stopped shaking. That night, when Jason walked through the door, smiling as if nothing had happened, I looked at him and realized I'd been married to a stranger, and now that I'd seen the truth, there was no unseeing it. When Jason came home that night, the sky was the same dull gray it had been all day, the kind of sky that looked like it was holding a secret. He hung his coat by the door, whistling softly, like nothing in the world was wrong. I was sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to scroll through my phone. My heart had been pounding for hours, but I'd trained my face into something neutral, calm, unreadable. "Hey," he said, smiling as he set his keys down. "You okay? You look pale." I forced a smile. "Just tired." He nodded, leaning over to kiss my cheek. I tried not to flinch. He didn't notice. He never did. As he moved around the kitchen, humming, heating leftovers, pouring himself a glass of wine, I studied him like a stranger. Every movement felt rehearsed. Every word sounded like part of a script I now knew was fake. He sat across from me, sipping his drink, glancing at his phone. "Long day at work?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "Yours?" He smiled faintly. "Same as always." I stared at him for a moment longer, then said softly, "You went to your parents today, right?" He didn't even look up. "Of course." "Why?" I took a slow breath. "Because I thought they were in Florida." The words hung in the air like smoke. He froze, just for a second, then laughed, shaking his head. "What? Florida? Who told you that?" "Mrs. Langford," I replied. My voice didn't shake. "She saw them at the airport. Said they were staying for 2 weeks. The color drained from his face. "Oh," he said, chuckling nervously. "Well, maybe they changed their minds and forgot to tell me." "Forgot," I repeated. "They forgot to tell their only son." He met my eyes then, searching for something, maybe a way out, maybe a lie that would still sound believable. But the silence between us was too heavy to fill. I set my phone on the table, unlocking the screen. A single photo glowed in the dim light. Jason's face, standing at the door of apartment 3B. The woman's arm around his waist. The little girl's hand clutching his shirt. He inhaled sharply. The mask finally cracked. "Emily," he started. I looked up, voice trembling, but firm. "Who are they?" He blinked, his mouth opening and closing like he'd forgotten how to speak. "Jason," I said, quieter now. "Who is that woman? And that little girl who called you daddy?" The word shattered something in him. He leaned back, rubbing his face with both hands. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking clock on the wall. Then, finally, he whispered, "I can explain." "Then do it," I said. "Because right now, I'm looking at a man I don't recognize." He stood up abruptly, pacing. "It's not what you think. I wasn't cheating on you, not like that." "Not like that?" I snapped, the anger finally spilling through my calm. "Then how exactly were you cheating on me, Jason?" He turned, his voice desperate. "Rosa, her name's Rosa. She's someone I used to know. A long time ago." "Used to?" I shot back. "You were hugging her like she's your wife." His jaw tightened. "She's not. We broke up years before I met you." "Then why are you still visiting her every week? Bringing groceries? Holding her child like she's—" I stopped mid-sentence, my breath catching. The realization hit me like ice water. "Jason," I whispered. "Is she your daughter?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence was enough. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "Her name's Lily," he said. "She's 6. I felt my knees weaken. I gripped the back of the chair to steady myself. "6, I repeated. "You've been lying to me for 6 years." "No," he said quickly. "I didn't lie about everything. I didn't know how to tell you. Rosa and I broke up before I ever met you, I swear. I didn't even know she was pregnant until a year later. I tried to be there for Lily, but I was scared you'd leave me if you found out." I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "So instead, you decided to let me live in a lie." "It wasn't like that," he said, stepping closer. "I just wanted to protect everyone. You, her, Lily, protect." I snapped, cutting him off. "You've been protecting yourself, Jason. You built 2 lives and let me live in the one made of glass." He stopped, his face crumbling. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way." I took a shaky step back. "But it did." Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't wipe them away. "You know the worst part?" I said softly. "If you'd told me the truth, I might have understood. I might have even tried to forgive you. But now? There's nothing left to forgive." He tried to reach for me, but I moved away. The distance between us had never felt wider. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the refrigerator, steady and cold. Finally, I whispered, I hope you know what you've destroyed. He looked at me, eyes red, mouth trembling. I was scared, he said again, voice breaking. I didn't want to lose you. I shook my head. You already have. And then I walked past him, out of the kitchen, down the hallway, into the bedroom we'd shared. I packed a small bag, a few clothes, my toothbrush, my wedding ring, which I placed carefully on the nightstand. When I left the house that night, the rain had started again. Cold, endless, cleansing. As I closed the door behind me, I realized something. Sometimes, betrayal doesn't come like a storm. It seeps in quietly, through words, through smiles, through Saturdays spent carrying groceries. And by the time you feel the flood, you're already drowning. I spent the first few nights at my sister's house, sleeping on her couch beneath a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender. It should have been comforting, but every creak of the floorboards reminded me of the house I'd left behind, and the man who'd made it feel like both a home and a prison. The days blurred together. Coffee went cold on the counter. Messages from friends went unread. And somewhere in the middle of that silence, I realized how strange it felt to be free, and not know what to do with it. One evening, as rain began to fall against the windows again, there was a knock on the door. I didn't need to look to know who it was. The sound of his knock, polite, rhythmic, familiar, was carved into my bones. I opened the door, and there he was. Jason stood on the porch, soaked to the skin, hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes were red, not from rain, but from regret. Emily, he said, voice trembling, please don't close the door. I just need to talk. For a second, I thought about slamming it shut. But something in me, maybe the part that still wanted closure, stepped aside and let him in. He stood there dripping on the rug, looking smaller than I remembered. I've been calling, he said. You didn't answer. I know, I replied simply. He rubbed the back of his neck, struggling for words. I don't even know where to start. How about the truth? I said. My tone wasn't sharp, just tired. You've had years to practice. He flinched. I deserve that. We stood there in silence for a moment, the air thick with everything unspoken. Finally, he exhaled, sitting down on the edge of the couch. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I was scared. I stayed standing. Of what? He looked up, his eyes glassy. Of losing you. Of being judged. Of everything falling apart if you knew who I really was. I folded my arms. So instead, you built an entire lie and watched me live in it. He swallowed hard. It wasn't supposed to go that far. When I met you, it was like I got a second chance at a life I'd ruined. I thought if I just took care of everyone, Rosa, Lily, you, maybe it would balance out somehow. I laughed bitterly. You think love is a math problem? That you can divide your life into neat pieces and expect everyone to stay in their lanes? Emily, please, he said, voice cracking. I never stopped loving you. Then why, I said, stepping closer, did you never trust me enough to tell me the truth? He didn't answer. He just stared at the floor like a child caught stealing. Do you have any idea what it's like, I continued, to sit at a dinner table with someone you thought you knew, and realize every word out of his mouth might be rehearsed? To replay every laugh, every touch, wondering which part of it was real. He lifted his head. It was all real. I shook my head slowly. No. Maybe it was real for you, but not for me. Because real love doesn't require pretending. Jason buried his face in his hands, his voice muffled. I was trying to protect everyone. I thought I was doing the right thing. Protecting who? I snapped. Her? Yourself? Because you didn't protect me. He looked up at me, broken, desperate. What do you want me to say? The truth, I said again, quieter this time. Not the version that makes you sound noble. For a moment, he hesitated, and then the last of his defenses fell away. I was going to leave you, he admitted, the words hit like ice. What? He swallowed. Rosa wanted to move to Seattle. She said she was tired of being a secret. I told her I couldn't just abandon you, that I needed time. But then, I started thinking about the money, the house, the divorce. I didn't want to lose everything. So you thought you could keep both, I said flatly. He nodded, shame flickering across his face. Until you found out. There it was, the truth, small and ugly, sitting between us like a dying flame. I felt the last bit of anger leave me, replaced by something colder. Pity, maybe. Or closure. You know what's strange, Jason? I said softly. When I saw you with that little girl, for a split second, I thought you looked happy. Happier than you ever did with me. He stared at me, speechless. I used to think love meant sacrifice, I continued. But now I realize, it only means something when both people are choosing the same truth. He took a shaky breath. Can we try again? Please. I'll do anything. Therapy, counseling, I'll be honest this time. I smiled sadly. You don't get to fix what you burned just because you feel sorry now. Emily, I'm done, I said, my voice steady. You had your chance to be honest when it mattered. Now I need to be honest with myself. He blinked, tears spilling down his face. I still love you. I nodded. Then let me go. The rain outside softened to a drizzle. He stood, defeated, his shoulders slumped. I'll sign whatever papers you need, he murmured. I already sent them, I replied. Check your email. He gave a hollow laugh. Of course you did. He turned toward the door, pausing for just a second. She asked about you, you know. Lily. She saw your picture once and said you looked kind. I felt my throat tighten. But I didn't answer. Jason hesitated, then walked out into the rain. The sound of the door closing behind him quieter than I expected, like an ending that didn't need noise. I stood there for a while, staring at the door, letting the silence fill the space where love used to live. Then, slowly, I exhaled. For the first time, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt clean. 3 days passed after Jason left. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, the kind that made every sound feel magnified. The click of a clock. The hum of the fridge. The whisper of rain brushing against the window. I tried to fill the silence with music, with chores, with anything that didn't involve remembering. But memories have a way of finding the cracks you don't seal tight enough. On the morning of the 4th day, I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through job listings I had no intention of applying for, when someone knocked on the door. At first, I thought maybe Jason had come back. My stomach twisted, half fear, half anger. But when I opened the door, it wasn't him. It was her, Rosa, the woman I'd seen holding Jason's hand in that tiny apartment. The woman whose child had called him daddy. She looked different in person, smaller somehow. Her face was pale, eyes rimmed red as if she hadn't slept in days. She held her purse tightly against her chest, like a shield. Emily? She said softly, almost afraid to use my name. I didn't answer right away. My instinct screamed to shut the door, to protect what little peace I had left. But something in her eyes stopped me, not guilt, not arrogance. Just exhaustion. The same kind I'd seen in my own reflection for weeks. Yes, I said finally. What do you want? I just need to talk, she whispered. Please. Just 5 minutes. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She entered the living room, her hands trembling slightly as she sat on the edge of the couch. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter. Then she took a deep breath. You don't have to worry. I didn't come to fight. I came to say I'm sorry. The words hung there, unsure where to land. I didn't know about you at first, she continued, her voice trembling. When I found out, I told him to leave. I thought he would. But he kept lying, to both of us. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. And you believed him? She nodded slowly. I wanted to. I guess I needed to. We have a daughter, Emily. I thought maybe if I held on long enough, he'd choose us. Her voice cracked on that last word, and something inside me softened despite myself. She wasn't my enemy, she was another victim of the same man's cowardice. Does Lily know? I asked quietly. Rosa shook her head. Not everything. She just thinks her dad works too much. I didn't have the heart to tell her that he doesn't even know how to love one family without breaking another. Her eyes filled with tears. I came because I heard you might press charges for fraud or emotional abuse. I understand if you do, God knows he deserves it. But if you could wait until after the custody hearing, please. Lily needs him. At least for now. I stared at her, stunned by the request. You're asking me to protect him? No, she said quickly, shaking her head. I'm asking you to protect her. I know he hurt you. He hurt me too. But if he goes to jail right now, Lily loses her father overnight. She doesn't deserve that. I felt anger rise in me, sharp and hot, but beneath it, there was something else. Understanding. The kind that hurts worse than rage. For a long moment, I just looked at her, the woman who had, without meaning to, destroyed my marriage. Sitting in my living room begging for her child's peace. Finally, I exhaled. You love your daughter, I said softly. With everything I have, she whispered. I nodded slowly. Then you already understand what I lost. Rosa's lip trembled. I do. More than you think. Silence fell again, heavy but not hostile this time. Just human. After a while, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded photo. She handed it to me. It was Lily, smiling in a field of sunflowers, her hair tied up in messy pigtails. Something in that photo broke the last wall I'd built around my heart. She's beautiful, I murmured. Rosa smiled faintly. She's the best part of him. I wanted to disagree, but I couldn't. Maybe she was right. I'm not going to press charges, I said finally. Not because he deserves peace, but because I do. Rosa's eyes widened. You mean that? I nodded. I'll file for divorce, sign whatever's needed, and then I'm done. Completely. I don't want his money, or his apologies. I just want to move on. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Thank you. Truly. She stood up slowly, hesitating near the door. If you ever want to see Lily? I'd like that. She's always asking questions. Maybe one day she deserves to know the full story, from someone kind. I didn't answer right away. My throat tightened. Maybe, I said finally. Someday. She nodded, then walked out into the gray drizzle. I stood at the window, watching as she disappeared down the street, a small figure under a worn umbrella, fading into the mist. For the first time, I didn't feel hatred. Just release. Because she wasn't the reason my life fell apart. Jason's lies were. When I finally sat back down, the apartment didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt lighter, like a room that had been aired out after a long winter. I made tea, opened my laptop, and began filling out the final divorce papers. My hand didn't shake this time. There were no tears. Just quiet resolve. Before bed, I took one last look at the photo she'd left behind. Lily's smile, wide, genuine, free, reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. There were still innocent hearts untouched by betrayal. And maybe, just maybe, that meant there was hope. As I turned off the lights, I whispered into the stillness, I forgive you, Jason. Not for you, but for me. The words didn't feel forced. They felt final, and for the first time in months, I slept without dreams. A year had passed. Portland's spring had finally arrived, gentle, damp, and full of color. The air smelled of wet soil and blooming tulips. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I woke up to birds instead of my own anxious thoughts. My life now fit inside a small flower shop tucked between a bakery and an old bookstore downtown. Its name, hand-painted in soft green letters across the window, read, Bloom and Balance. Every morning, I unlocked the door, turned the sign to open, and breathed in the scent of fresh roses and eucalyptus. The bell above the door jingled softly, like a reminder that peace could have a sound too. It wasn't the life I used to dream of, it was better. Because it was mine. People often say forgiveness is a gift you give to someone else. They're wrong. It's something you give to yourself when you're ready to stop carrying the weight of someone else's choices. It took me months to reach that point. At first, I couldn't even hear Jason's name without feeling that old ache, a mixture of love, hate, and confusion. But time has a way of sanding down the sharp edges of memory. Eventually, I stopped checking the news for updates on his life. I stopped wondering if he'd regret what he did. I stopped waiting for an apology that would never heal me anyway, because I realized I didn't need closure from him. I just needed to close the door myself. On quiet afternoons, customers sometimes asked if I'd always loved flowers. I'd smile and tell them the truth. No, I started when my life fell apart. When everything else died, I needed something that could bloom again. The shop became more than a business, it was therapy disguised as work. I learned the patience of waiting for seeds to sprout, the humility of pruning what didn't grow, and the quiet joy of watching something beautiful rise from the dirt. It's funny, flowers never hold grudges. They just reach for the light. One rainy Wednesday, a letter arrived. The handwriting was messy, uneven, a child's. It was postmarked from New Orleans. I sat behind the counter, heart already tugging, and opened it. Dear Aunt Emily, Mommy said I could write to you. I planted sunflowers like you showed me. They're taller than me now. Daddy said he's sorry for being gone a lot, but it's okay because I have Mommy and my flowers. I hope you have lots of flowers too. Love, Lily. I read it twice, then folded it gently, pressing the paper to my chest. I hadn't realized how much I needed that letter, not because of what it said, but because of what it meant. Life had gone on. For all of us, Jason was just a shadow now, someone who once existed in my story but no longer shaped it. And somehow, I could wish him peace without wanting him back. That evening, after closing the shop, I walked home along the quiet street. The city lights reflected on wet pavement, shimmering like small constellations under my feet. My hands smelled faintly of lavender and rain. At home, the apartment was small but warm. A kettle whistled on the stove while I flipped through old photographs, my parents, my sister, even one of Jason and me on our wedding day. I didn't cry this time. I simply looked, nodded, and tucked the picture away in a box labeled past. The next morning, I woke early and carried a basket of white lilies to the park near the river. The sky was pale blue, the air cool and still. I knelt by the water, where sunlight shimmered across the surface, and released the flowers one by one. They drifted slowly, carried by the current, like forgiveness itself, gentle but unstoppable. Goodbye, I whispered. Not to Jason, not even to the pain, but to the version of myself that once believed love meant enduring everything. As I stood there, I realized something: survival hadn't made me hard. It had made me soft in the right places, more compassionate, more aware, more alive. When I returned to the shop, Rosa was waiting by the door. She smiled, holding Lily's hand. The little girl waved shyly, a sunflower pin in her hair. Hi, Aunt Emily, she said. My throat tightened, but I smiled back. Hi, sweetheart. Rosa squeezed my arm gently. She wanted to see the flowers. Of course, I said. Come in. We spent the afternoon arranging bouquets, Lily's small fingers fumbling with ribbons, Rosa laughing as petals fell to the floor. The air was filled with warmth and the scent of new beginnings. When they left, Rosa hugged me quietly. "Thank you for everything." I nodded. "Take care of her." As the door closed, I stood for a moment, surrounded by the colors of life, soft pinks, deep blues, and bright yellows, the palette of healing. I wiped my hands on my apron, looked out the window, and whispered, "Forgiveness isn't about saying what they did was okay. It's about freeing yourself from the pain they left behind." Outside, the last drops of rain clung to the glass, catching sunlight until they shimmered like tiny stars, and for the first time, I didn't feel broken. I felt whole, beautifully, imperfectly whole. The bell over the door jingled as another customer walked in. I turned, smiled, and said, "Welcome to Bloom and Balance. How can I help you today?" Because life doesn't wait for the pain to disappear before it begins again. It just blooms, quietly, stubbornly, right where the scars used to be.